Oh, hi. This week, we're gonna play around with my spedeweve and do some visible mending. I was gifted this for Christmas by my best friend, and I've dabbled, figured out a couple things that I prefer to do with mine, and the instructions are pretty vague for the kit that I got. So I'll just walk you through fixing this cheap Target cardigan I got a very many years ago. There's been these holes developing where the tag is. So first order business is just getting rid of this. To position the loom, you take the round wood bit and you stuff it under the hole. Mine is right at the edge of the binding for this cardigan, so I do have to finagle it a little bit differently. Usually I add some stitches above where the hole is, but I'm gonna stop mine right at that edge. But obviously you can position yours wherever you want. That's the joy of DIY. You do it your own damn self. And then you put an elastic around that and pull it nice and taut. I did refinagle mine once I realized that the pegs were gonna kind of like go over the hole and I need it to be like just above, if not a little ways above. Then I just fit the metal piece into the groove above that first elastic. Then I took another elastic and very clumsily went about attaching it around the entire workspace we have set up here. Then, as we all know, I hoard everything, so this is my embroidery floss collection. I'm gonna pick some primary colors because yes, I could be boring and try to pick something that matches closely, but that's the point of like visible mending, is making it look intentional, and I want this to be kind of fun. I have these big chunky needles that have pretty rounded tips, so they're not meant to pierce anything. They're meant to go kind of between the fibers of the fabric. I think these are called darning needles. This is me attempting to thread it, but the thing with embroidery floss is there are 6 strands and trying to get all of them through first time is always kind of a headache. So let's try this again. Oh, and I forgot. I actually want to do chalk lines, which I've never done before. I like having everything kind of squared up, and I can get things pretty even, but some of my other ones, the edges aren't as crisp as I would like them, where I'm kind of off by a couple threads as I loop everything through. I'm gonna chalk out the actual area I want to use so that I can keep straighter lines. But you don't have to do this. It can be an abstract shape. I just think this will help give a neater and tighter weave because there won't be any areas where the threads are longer than other areas. Everything's getting the same amount of tension on it. So once I have that threaded, oh, and if the pegs are to one side or the other, I find it easier to do this part with the pegs straight up. So I want to leave a tail because I don't want to start with knots on any of this, especially because knotting every thread I'm going to be using would add so much bulk to this area that I don't want. That would be super uncomfortable and also pretty noticeable, and like the whole thing would be really knobbly and weird. Just leaving an inch or two for a tail and then starting with the thread on top of the fabric at that chalk line, then doing one loop up over that first hook. It almost never stays when I do it, so I just weave the thread back down at the bottom and leave another tail, and then as I'm pulling it, not taut, but like pulling it down so it's kind of straightened, that's when I'll make sure it hooks over that peg, because yeah, it pops off all the time and I don't like fighting with it, and that gets me quicker to frustration. So I just know myself better. So once I have my loops, this is a way I have seen that I do differently than some other people, but also you kind of have to do it if you're alternating colors like I'm doing, where I am not continuing up and down with one thread. I'm snipping this one and I'm going on to the next color. But I do this even if I'm using all the same color, because at the end it's a lot easier to pull on those, because if you're weaving back and forth you only have like one end for multiple peg loops and it's hard to tighten that. And again, I maybe go about mine in a different way than everyone else, but this is what works for me and I have found less frustrating. To be fair, my frustration threshold is like below the earth's mantle. Also, because I have multiple darning needles, I have 3 different going because I'm going to be using the same thread color multiple times. Just easier than trying to like constantly rethread the same needle every time. So once all the pegs are threaded, I'm going to move all the pegs to one side. I start on the left. I don't know if this is because I'm left-handed or that's how we're taught to write or some subconscious thing, but every time I've darned something like this, that's where I've started. For this, I thought about using all the same colors, but I don't have enough of this blue to do the whole thing. So I am actually switching to a gray because I think it's going to add a fun contrast to these bright colors now. So this one does sort of match the cardigan, which goes against what I said earlier, but amongst the other threads, I think it's going to add a really cool effect. And that's kind of the artistic part of this, is deciding what patterns you want to get and what color combinations you want to do. This is the way I'm going to tackle it, but you do you. Okay, so once we have all our columns and we got our other thread color picked, and we're going to start the rows, so the left to right part of this. Pegs are to one side. We have a tail going with our new thread color that we picked. I'm starting just above where those column threads are stitched at the bottom, if that makes sense. So I'm starting like one row of fibers in the garment above that. I'm going over, under, whatever's easier with the direction of the pegs. You're going to see the lift happening because of the pegs being flipped a certain direction. It's going to make it easier for the needle to go in. And you can have the needle up towards the top of the pegs. There's going to be more gaping there between the two just because it's holding it separate and they're not lying as flat as they are on the bottom. That's fine. You can push them through up there. It's going to go quicker. This is why it's called a speed weave. When you're darning on a wooden mushroom or like the darning egg, you're having to like make that lift with your hand as you're going, so it's a little more tricky. So once it's through to the other side, you can pick what order you want to do all this stuff in, but I stick the needle through on the opposite chalk line, because remember I have a chalk line on the left and the right, and then you're just going to go back up. So I'm only picking up like one thread in the garment, or maybe two, to do this gap. So once I come back up, I'm going to flip all the pegs to the other direction, and then because I went over under on my way to the right, when I come back left, I'm going to do the opposite of that. And once my needle is like across, this is why the longer needles are good, once it's through all of the loops, I like to shimmy the needle down and push that first thread I did on my first pass down as top to the bottom as I can. So then I'll pull that thread all the way through, pick up another stitch on the left side, flip the pegs over. I hope any of this is making sense. Hopefully the visual is helping. It's just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Obviously, the smaller the hole, the smaller the patch has to be, the less time this is going to take. And then yeah, you see the pattern forming. So once I was as close to the pegs as possible, I went to go do my last row where like I could barely fit the needle through everything. Pulled it across, left a little bit of a tail, was done with that needle and that thread for now. Then I kind of kept my thumb over all of the weaving I just did, and then pulled all the primary color tails at the bottom. They were nice and taut, and I wasn't like tugging on the garment itself, but just on those loops at the top. And then, you know, just check that the gray threads were also as taut as they could be without scrunching up the garment. Then I rethreaded another needle. I again just used the gray thread because this would match pretty close, and because the left, right, and bottom all had actual stitches along it, but the top didn't because it just had those loops on the pegs. There's nothing attaching the top of this patch to the actual garment. I go in, again, leaving a little tail an inch or two away from where I'm trying to start the stitching, and then I just whip stitch that top edge to the actual fabric. Now this is where it's more helpful if you do some of the stitching above the hole, but again, because my cardigan has this like trimmed edge right there, I didn't want any of the stitches to go over that part, so I just made things harder for myself. Are we surprised? Of course we're not. Then when I got to the end of the whip stitching, I just pulled that thread through the back, weaved in the ends. I weaved in a couple things. I also wove in the first part of that piece of thread, so like that initial tail for the whip stitching, I wove that in. Then I pulled all of the other tails through the back from any other bits that were sticking through to the front. So this is what it looks like on the back and the front. I should have trimmed the tails down a little bit more before I grabbed the interfacing, but I was able to improvise, so it's fine. I always say, like, when you mess things up, you tend to learn more. I think it's more helpful and practical to know how to troubleshoot things rather than everything goes smoothly the first time, or at least that's my excuse for not just being the world's most competent person first time around. Like, you gotta figure shit out. Anyways, I cut a small piece of interfacing that was a little bigger than the patch. I laid this on top of my tailor's ham. Isn't tailor ham, like Taylor, a thing? Isn't like New Jersey maybe? Is that like a pork roll? Some sewing things are just named weird, like a bodkin. Where did that come from? The things I spend way too much time thinking about. Okay, back to the thing. We're so close to being done. So I warmed up the actual surface, and that also helped tighten up stretched out or loosened parts of this area. It kind of wanted the fibers to hug each other close again. Then I ironed the interfacing onto it. Then I trimmed the rest of the tails to the edge of the interfacing, but then it left like a flappy bit at the bottom because all of those threads kept the interfacing from actually attaching to the fabric. So I just took another little strip of interfacing, laid that over, and then fixed that. So it was not the end of the world. Also, as always, maybe remember to heat up your iron before the moment you need to use your iron. Just perpetually waiting on that thing. And that is my little rainbow patch. Ignore this other hole. Obviously, I still need to fix that one, but it's also cool seeing the comparison. Like, this hole was pretty much exactly like the one over here, and this is what it looks like now. And I fucking love it. This is a thing I'm very passionate about, is giving your clothes more life. Not everyone has access to sustainable brands because they can be expensive. I have never bought anything from a sustainable brand, even though like I do theoretically support them. Like, I like the idea of it. And actually that's not true. I do specifically buy Blue Q brand socks, and I buy bags from a brand called Bungalow 360. But I thrift a lot of my stuff, or I make it from scratch. And I know not everyone has that capability. But I think mending is the most practical skill to have, because then if you do get cheap clothes, cheaply made clothes that are also inexpensive, then you can keep that in rotation more and not let it just fall apart, which is kind of what they're meant to do, which is horrifying, but that's just where we are in the world, and this is my way of combating that. And I like a lot of the clothes that I own, so I don't like the idea of them being around for such a short time. I love the stuff that I have done the visible mending on. It just gives it more personality, and I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. And then if someone asks me about it, I get to jump on my soapbox. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This is just one of many things in my needing to be mended pile. I have a whole bag that I was showing off on a Patreon exclusive video I just posted the other day. It is because of my patrons that I am able to do videos like this and get to spend time working on these projects. So thank you to all of them for letting me do the dang thing. I appreciate it so much, and I love getting to see what y'all are doing. There's a Discord that they opened up to everybody, so if you want the invite link, just shoot me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or email, or whatever's easier for you, and you can come hang out and share your projects and channels you like and your shops and your pets. Obviously, I love seeing pets. Mine is currently by my feet sleeping, where he is 99% of the time I'm filming a video. And I will see you all back here next Friday with the next project. Thank you so much for hanging out. I need someone to make a fidget toy that's just the top part of this, because I could do this shit all day.